This whole culture of negative video essays and people being upset about all the negativity, the reason why there's more negativity is just because the games are getting worse.
Lazy remakes, chasing trends, live service slop, modern audience pandering, broken launches, laughable writing, AI and blockchain nonsense, de nouveau, insane budgets, mass layoffs, and so much more has defined this industry.
Over the last few years, it's clear that the gaming industry is headed face first into another industry collapse.
The modern gaming industry is dying. There are really no other words to qualify what is happening right now within the space.
Basically, every franchise I cared about 10 years ago is either dead or some twisted, disgusting abomination barely resembling what it used to be.
Why does Fall Guys have a battle pass?
Common thing I see in my comments on Twitter is just that modern gaming sucks.
Turns out Xbox is dead again. It's one of those other weeks where every now and then someone gets out there, does a new quote, new interview.
It feels like the video game industry has been dying so long, I've become completely apathetic to it.
It's cynical. It's the opposite of fun. It's over.
Bit dramatic. I think all this talk of video games dying, for whatever reason, it's all gotten a bit out of hand. I want to investigate this sentiment and examine what has become a very common topic in the online discourse of this medium, and I want to do so with an open mind. I'm going to talk about the origins of Doomerism and whether things are indeed so over. If so, what we need to do to be so back. I want to consider that holistically. Is it the games industry that is dying? Is it the games? Both? Or neither? Are games getting worse? Is it the world that is getting worse? Or does it just feel that way? And if so, why? Why does it feel over? It's over. I'm sure you've heard that before. Doomerism is becoming pretty pervasive in video game discourse. Before I get too deep into how and why, I want to speak about Doomerism in general terms because our perspective of the world does affect our enjoyment of the things in it. Doomerism is a philosophy of extreme pessimism. It is a fatalistic outlook which sees that all hope is lost. There is only doom. I want to be very careful examining this perspective, because if you yourself have this worldview, it could be that you are not the wise adherent of a based philosophy, but instead experiencing symptoms of depression. I'm not diagnosing you if you feel that way, but a lack of hope in the future is one of the diagnostic criteria for a major depressive disorder. I am not saying if you have a pessimistic outlook that you are depressed. I'm saying there is a correlation, and I know because I have experienced it firsthand. I spent a good deal of my 20s with a nihilistic worldview. It was hard to get out of that, because when I was in that position, I began to see the worst in everything, the evil in everyone, and any time an opportunity was presented to me, the only thing I could think was, what's the catch? I came to inhabit that perspective because I was going through a major depressive episode, which happened for a number of reasons that I won't get into here. I try not to reveal too much of my personal life on this channel, but mental health is important to me. And the reason for that is because I know what it is like to be very mentally ill. It's why I decided to pursue a career in psychology, because I wanted to help other people through it, because there is light at the end of the tunnel. I acknowledge that I'm in a privileged position. I'm able to study and work towards my goals while getting a bit of cash on the side talking about video games. I'm not doing double shifts in a coal mine or surviving day to day in a war-torn country. I'm not here to tell you everything is going to be okay for you personally, because I don't know what you're going through. It's normal to feel this way, and it often has more to do with what is going on internally than any pervasive truth about humanity. For that reason, this video is not asking the question, am I fucked? It asks, are we fucked? And that's a very different question. If you're personally doing it tough, the pinned comment will have some resources for you to seek some help. You're not alone. When I was going through my rough patch, I didn't consider myself a doomer. I was far too pretentious for that. My perspective was inspired by the work of both Eugene Thacker and Thomas Ligotti. Their work heavily inspired the first season of True Detective, so heavily that the lead writer Nick Pizzolatto has been accused of outright plagiarism.
I'd consider myself a realist, all right, but in philosophical terms, I'm what's called a pessimist.
Okay, what's that mean?
Means I'm bad at parties.
Thacker wrote a book called Cosmic Pessimism. It opens with the phrase, "We're doomed." He continues, "Pessimism is the night side of thought, a melodrama of the futility of the brain, a poetry written in the graveyard of philosophy." Thomas Ligotti is a horror writer, but he has also written some novels of philosophy. He wrote a book called The Conspiracy Against the Human Race, which I hesitate to recommend to anyone because if you're not depressed now, you will be if you read it. In the book, Ligotti promotes an anti-natalist view, which is the suggestion that we should just stop having children and allow ourselves to be the final generation of humanity.
I think the honorable thing for our species to do is deny our programming. Stop reproducing. Walk hand in hand into extinction.
And for a good deal of my life, I agreed. There are a lot of doomers in Gen Z. I'm a millennial, but I can empathize with Gen Z people who are entering adult life only to discover how shit adult life can be. The average salary can't buy a home. Most well-paid careers require a university education, but tuition is so high that you'll likely be spending a good deal of what you earn paying off your student loans. The rich get richer, the poor get poorer, and the destruction of the earth could occur at any time from any number of apocalypse scenarios. Millennials went through all of this a little over a decade ago, and boomers told us to pick ourselves up by our bootstraps and stop buying avocado on toast. So I'm not going to talk down to you and tell you everything is actually fine. Generally, things aren't fine right now, but that doesn't mean that they won't get better, because even when things aren't fine, history tells us we do always seem to find a way through to the other side. There's a book called The Fourth Turning, and in the book, William Strauss and Neil Howe formulate a theory that history operates in cycles. In the same way that story follows an act structure, history, according to Strauss and Howe, adheres to a pattern. Each cycle contains 4 turnings, and each turning encompasses an average human lifespan. The turnings then represent generational change, with each generation serving an archetypal function in the story. The cycle we're in is said to have started after World War II and is ending right about now. So here's how the cycle works. The first turning is the high. This is the age of the baby boomer. It is the birth of the American dream and the land of opportunity. The future is bright for all. The second turning is the awakening. Gen X comes of age in this land of opportunity and starts to see some cracks. Because nothing is truly bright for all, there has to be someone getting the short end of the stick. And as people become more aware, a contrarian view forms. Flaws are pointed out and improvements are suggested. The third turning is the unraveling. Millennials are raised in a world of constant criticism. Dissatisfaction becomes a lot more urgent. Millennials say, if we're aware of all these problems, why aren't we doing anything about it? And so they do, or at least they try. Discussion becomes debate, which provokes conflict that worsens over time, and that divide just keeps growing. Finally, The fourth turning, crisis. Gen Z grows up watching millennials fighting an impossible battle and turn to apathy. There is no fixing society. It's doomed. And they're right. Society has become unsustainable, and the story arc comes to a close, often violently. But it's not the end, because Gen Z have an important archetypal function in the fourth turning. They are the artists. Their job isn't to just sit by as society crumbles. Their job is to start work on the next cycle. The theory in the fourth turning suggests that the reason that everything feels like it is ending is that it is. It's the end of an era, but it's not the end of the world.
Then the question becomes, if it can be anything, how do you decide which one you want to move to? What are the futures? The future isn't this distant place. It's not a noun. It's actually a verb. It's something that you make. If we want to steer away from this iceberg that we're heading towards, we don't need a great man to do it for us. We need collective action. If we are to move forward as a people, as a species, we have to plant trees whose shade we'll never know.
That video was called Debunking Doomerism. It serves as a really good summary for the opposing philosophy of doomerism, futurism. I don't know if I'd call myself a futurist, but my days of being a cosmic pessimist are definitely behind me. I also don't know if I completely believe in the theory put forth in the fourth turning either. It's often criticized as being pseudo-scientific and predicated on future knowledge, which is obviously impossible to verify. It's essentially a historical horoscope, but it's interesting when you boil it down to its essential elements. There is a high stemming from collective confidence, then criticisms arise as individual perspective is considered, nuance develops, and criticism becomes impossible to ignore. There is protest, but it fails to result in meaningful, lasting change, and so apathy sets in. Apathy leads to collapse, but it's not the end, because something new is always birthed from the ashes, and so the cycle continues. Sound familiar? It's over. We're back. It's everywhere. But the arc we see in online discourse spans a lot less time than the generational theory put forth in the fourth turning. It cycles on a day-to-day basis, and history is constantly being rewritten. The hype train kicks into overdrive with trailers and footage and reviews from the mainstream journalists. They call it a masterpiece. Then people get their hands on it, and some people find flaws. People criticize it because they were promised a perfect game. Criticism turns to protest, and the divide widens until apathy sets in, and people lose interest until a new title is announced that serves in some way to address community concern. We're so back, and so on, and so on. That's right, video games. We're talking about video games, the rise of video game doomerism, the title of the video. Now that title is a bit misleading, because I've been around video games for a long time, and the truth is that doomerism has always existed in some form. But it does seem to be getting worse. When a game flops, it's not just a business setback, it's the death of gaming. And when something succeeds, we're not just happy because we have a fun game to play, it's because video games are back. We're living through what Strauss and Howe called a crisis period, which could explain why criticism has become so urgent, because the stakes have never been higher. Every cultural battle decides the future of the medium. But video games are products, and so to understand the mechanism powering this it's over, we're back cycle, we need to consider the industry. So how about a refresher? leaving a lot out. Obviously, we're talking about decades of history here, but the point is that there is a clear pattern. That is that if something is commercially successful, you'd better believe you're going to see a whole lot more until it stops making money. If it stops making money, corporations will pivot to maintain a competitive edge. They have to, or they go out of business. If they go out of business, the world keeps turning. There are countless other businesses willing to step in and fill that hole in the market. Nature abhors a vacuum. This is all just supply and demand. You see this in every industry, certainly in film. Trends lead the industry, but audiences grow tired and they die, and new trends begin. Many people have heralded the MCU as the death of cinema, but if people stop going to see them, they'll stop making them and they'll be forced to make something else. If that becomes successful, then eventually they'll make so much of it that people will start calling that the death of cinema, and so on and so forth. It happened to musicals and westerns and rom-coms, and yes, it will eventually happen to Marvel movies. Everything has a half-life. The trend will become tired and people will stop going. Trends dictate the market, but even when they die, they're not dead. They just stop being fashionable. Point-and-click adventure games died long ago, but there are still many releases even now, and many are good. But thinking everything will be fine eventually is reductive. It doesn't really address the very real problems currently facing the industry, and there are problems. The truth is that the state of the games industry is becoming impossible to ignore, because for the first time in a long while, there is talk of the bubble bursting. Video games are the most profitable medium of entertainment. And since the video game crash of 1983, the industry has seen a long, consistent period of unbelievable growth. Until now. What has happened? Is the industry dying? Now, I need to preface all of this by saying my background is not in economics. I've talked about the business side of the industry in previous videos about Nintendo, but this sort of thing isn't really my wheelhouse, but I have done my research. There's a lot, and so I'm cherry-picking quite a bit here. Feel free to do your own research and take my opinions on all of this for what they're worth. And they are opinions. It's really important to point out that although cold, hard data has evidentiary value, an interpretation of that data does not. That's what confuses a lot of people in the discussion of subjectivity and objectivity. You can say objectively, people spent less on video games than the year before, but you can't say objectively why. Is it because there weren't any good games worth buying, or is it because people didn't have enough money? That is an interpretation. So let's take a look at the data first, and then I'll share what I think is the most compelling interpretation for all this. After a decade of annual growth averaging 6%, profits have started to retract violently. The industry profited $184 billion in 2023, which was a sharp decline from its peak in 2021. There was an increase in 2024, but it was negligible. And although the decline has slowed, there are some other worrying statistics. Mass layoffs have hit every corner of the industry, and reports suggest that only 20% of video games make a profit. That all sounds very bad. What is happening? To understand the decline, we need to understand the peak, because that was a very interesting time for gamers. The COVID-19 pandemic. Gaming was an escape, but also a way to socialize, and so it led to a lot of new users. Despite all the memes about the lack of games on the PS5, the PlayStation 5 has actually been the most profitable generation for Sony to date, and it's likely because of COVID-19. Usage in general for all video games increased exponentially. In March 2020 alone, usage increased by 75%. Corporations quickly started figuring out how they could capitalize on all this. Recruitment became a priority so that they could get teams together to start working on new projects. People were spending a lot more time playing games, so the intention was to produce games that had both a long shelf life and an opportunity for ongoing monetization. They banked on live service, and, well, we all know how that panned out. Sony reportedly had 20 live service games in development, which boggles the mind. I don't know how they expected people to buy that many battle passes, and the trend was already on its way out. There is still, of course, the occasional success story, but those are few and far between. The battle pass is the kiss of death. It's a meme. But blaming the dip on the live service gamble alone is a mistake, because there is a much simpler explanation. Profits increased when everyone was stuck at home with nothing to do but play video games. They were stuck at home because of the COVID-19 epidemic, so it would stand to reason that when people went back to work, there would be a decline, and that's exactly what happened. Yet the industry has been making cuts left and right, so it seems they didn't really account for it. They were expecting the number to go up, it didn't, and tons of people have lost their jobs because of it. But here's the thing. Even with all this glaring oversight, they're all doing just fine. Despite Sony having one of the biggest bombs in video game history, they're set to have a 4.6% increase to profits in 2025, which is almost on par with pre-pandemic levels. Nintendo were obviously having a pretty damn good year too. Microsoft is doing great, and they're set to do even better now they have a whole lot less salaries to pay. It's easy to suggest the industry is flailing if you only look at the most glaring failures, but in actuality, the market is projected to double, yes, double, by 2033. The AAA industry is not dying. That isn't to say things don't need to change. Despite the market stabilizing, the layoffs are ongoing, and we're still seeing examples of games rushed out the door to make a quick profit rather than languish in development hell. Studios are shut down even when they make critically successful games because they fall short of unrealistic targets. It should be clear to everyone that the current way of doing things is unsustainable for consumers and corporations. Sony has seen an increase in profits, yes, but they'd see a lot more if they hired staff long enough for them to finish a game they can sell. Production costs have skyrocketed as corporations compete to push the tech further. The most effective weapon in the console war has always been graphics, and each generation has seen a remarkable jump in technical quality, but those advances have stagnated. Production costs, however, have not. Spider-Man is estimated to have cost around $100 million to make. Spider-Man 2 is estimated to have cost over triple that, $315 million. $40 million of that is reported to have been spent on the cinematics alone. AAA developers have three options. They lower production costs, they charge more for their games, or they take the Nintendo strategy and do both. Miyamoto previously stated in an interview, "We believe that not all products require large costs. Even in the case of video games, with the current technology, it is possible to create fun games with a small number of developers in a short period of time. We believe it is important not to lose sight of this perspective." Unfortunately, they have. You can profit more by making it easier to break even. We can see this is the right strategy with the current rise of the AA market. Some estimate Clair Obscur Expedition 33 to have cost as little as $5 to $10 million, and many people are calling it Game of the Decade. It looks pretty incredible despite costing 96.83% less than Spider-Man 2, and those savings are passed on to the consumer. These studios don't need to spend the amount they're spending to make great games. They just don't. Nintendo has been doing it for years, and now that Sony and Microsoft seem to have abandoned exclusives, they shouldn't need to compete in the same way. And if they're reducing production costs by firing staff, you would think that would offset the need to increase consumer prices. Wouldn't you? Especially considering that market value is slowly returning to peak levels and projected to grow far beyond? AAA studios can't just keep charging more to break even. Salaries aren't increasing at the same rate, and there is a limit to what people can reasonably afford. What they need to do is take a page out of the boomer's guide to adult life and pick themselves up by their bootstraps, live within their means, and stop buying avocado on toast. Because this is unsustainable. People seem to be more than fine paying $80 for Mario Kart World because they believe it's worth the price. Fine. But what happens when they're not worth the price? Because it's not just $80 for Mario Kart, it's looking to be every major AAA release, and that adds up. The crash of 1983 happened because there were too many games and they cost too much. We have so many more games now, decades of video game history. Statistics suggest more people now are choosing to play older titles than pay AAA pricing on release. That's going to get a whole lot worse because you'd have to be a pretty amazing game to justify paying $80 rather than installing one of the hundreds of games you bought on sale at 90% off and never played. There wouldn't be this amount of doomerism online about video games dying if there wasn't at least a little truth to it. Games are constantly being released unfinished, yet we're being told we need to pay more due to rising development costs. These games haven't been developed, guys. Where's the money going? But it's the cycle. It's over. We're so back. They will eventually learn their lesson if people stop buying it. Or people will be priced out so hard that they won't have a choice but to not buy it. Corporations will have to adapt, or they will die. And if they die, someone else will fill in the gap to give the people what they want, supply and demand. The video game industry will be fine. It's not dead, but that doesn't mean it doesn't need to change. It does. This kind of thing isn't good for anyone, and yet people still defend it. A frequent strategy I see when people defend anti-consumer strategies from billion-dollar corporations is when they compare them to worse anti-consumer strategies from billion-dollar corporations. That's classic whataboutism. You think Nintendo are bad? At least they're not Blizzard. Nintendo doesn't have battle passes or microtransactions. And I guarantee you, if Nintendo did decide to add microtransactions, they'd move the goalposts. At least Bowser doesn't reach through the screen and take your anal virginity. Why aren't we comparing these shitty business practices to good pro-consumer strategies? There are good companies in the industry, but people never want to talk about it. They want to talk about all the capitalist pig dogs who only care about the numbers going up, but that's not how the vast majority of game studios operate. Valve is a privately owned company. They have no shareholders. They have no responsibility to make that number go up, and it's a point of pride for them. Why aren't we comparing gaming corporations to Valve? They're one of the most successful gaming corporations in the industry, and they've done so with pretty admirable intentions. They should be who we look to for how corporations in this industry should treat their consumers. We need more positive role models, not just cautionary tales. Now, Steam isn't without its problems. No corporation is. The Steam Direct program has created a lot of opportunities for indie developers, but it's flooding the market. This is the primary reason why only 20% of games make a profit. It's not because AAA studios are flailing. It's because a good deal of video games get lost in the crowd. That's why discounts are so aggressive. It is a rough time to get into the games industry. Not just because of layoffs, but because even if you manage to make a game on your own with no studio help for years, in your free time for no pay, even if that game turns out to be amazing, if it's a 10 out of 10 experience, you will likely make no money. People are being discouraged from working in the industry. They're being told to keep it a hobby and pursue something more realistic. That's not unusual for a career in the arts, but video games take a long time to make. It can take years and years to make a game in your free time, all while holding down a job so you can keep a roof over your head. It's unrealistic, and making it is half the battle. You need to market it and do all the admin busy work that has nothing to do with making games but has everything to do with selling them. You can be an amazing game designer, but a terrible marketer, and that will have more impact on how much you profit than quality. Not every indie game is Balatro. More often than not, they go unnoticed, even when they're really good. We can do more to support indie developers, more than downloading the next big indie game from PS Plus or Games Pass or waiting for a sale at 90% off. If you think the state of the industry is in a rough spot, stop supporting the corporations that are causing that to happen. Give your money to people who need it, or to corporations that treat you with a modicum of respect. Because if you tell me video games are dying while you pay the people you think are killing them, you have no one to blame but yourself. But the problems facing the industry aren't just solved by voting with our wallets, because perception is often just as important as reality. Video game culture is shaped by discourse, and one aspect of that discourse that's undeniably in trouble is games journalism. Games journalism has become a bit of a slur over the last decade, but a games journalist is just someone that reports or reviews video games for an audience for money. I'm technically a video game journalist, so are all the people on YouTube telling you game journalists are the death of the industry. They're doing the same job. But like them, I'm talking about the big outlets specifically. The IGNs, the Kotakus, etc. For many years now, their revenue has been dependent on sponsorship deals, and they've mostly come from video game studios. Obviously, that's a conflict of interest. For this reason, mainstream game journalists have, understandably, been taken to task for being corporate shills. The most famous example is when Jeff Gertzman was fired due to a negative review he did for Kane and Lynch, a game which is very bad.
Kane and Lynch Dead Men is an ugly, ugly game. That's not necessarily me talking just about the graphics. It's got a really ugly storyline with characters that are impossible to like, and it's a third-person shooter that has several gameplay flaws as well.
He was fired because the publishers of the game, Eidos Interactive, threatened to drop their sponsorship unless the review was positive. But it's not just the big outlets doing this. The Other Frost posted a video last year exposing Nick Calandra, his former employer at Second Wind, which was formed as a haven for creators including Zero Punctuation's Yahtzee Crawshaw, who escaped The Escapist. It is alleged that Calandra would exchange positive reviews and featured articles for trips, gifts, and cash, not just from big AAA publishers, but indie studios who relied on the exposure and had far less to give. The evidence given is detailed and compelling. This story really flew under the radar, which is surprising considering the creators involved, the seriousness of the allegations, and the scope of the evidence presented. It is a really shocking example of unethical games journalism, and I cynically suspect that the reason it has flown under the radar is because it concerns a YouTuber and not a writer for IGN or Kotaku. It is understandable that negative video games discourse has become more trustworthy. We have a lot more skepticism over the critic review than the audience review, because the fans are real gamers. YouTube has become the haven for that, but YouTubers are susceptible to the same biases. The line between audience review and critic review is pretty thin. If a regular person starts a YouTube channel where they review or critique games and that channel is monetized, they are no longer giving an audience review. They are critics. It's a job. There is undeniably a financial incentive to negativity as well. Negativity sells. We know this. This is what has fueled the 24-hour news cycle for decades now. But it's worse than ever now in the social media age, because today, the 24-hour news cycle competes for coverage on a dual monitor while you check your phone. I have personal experience with this as a creator on YouTube. The two most popular videos on my channel are the ones which are really negative. Although I've avoided feeding into that, it is always in the back of my mind. I make a lot of different kinds of videos. It's hard to ignore when one is more successful than another, and that does inform which videos I consider making. I know that I am more successful when I get angry. So when I get angry about something, I do have this thought in my head of, that would make a good video. But then I have to filter it by thinking, when I say good video, do I mean good video, or do I mean profitable? The algorithm is fueled by strong opinions. Comments are a huge decider in what makes a video on YouTube successful. YouTube wants you to argue because it keeps you on the website. It wants engagement, not enjoyment. The first negative video I released really kickstarted the channel. You don't need to watch that video to understand this one, but I will spend a bit of time talking about it because if you didn't, you would miss some important context. In that video, I criticized several YouTube critics for a style of criticism which I argued was toxic because they spent less time critiquing the game than they did the people who liked them. The video was about the critic review, not the audience review. It was about YouTubers. When I made that video, I did not consider myself a YouTuber. That was only my second scripted video, and I had less than 500 subscribers. I wasn't even monetized. Now, I have over 1 million views across the videos on my channel, and frankly, that's been confronting. And yes, I know, boo-hoo, you made some successful videos. I'm not complaining, but I spoke a lot in that video about the responsibility that people with a platform have to their audience, and now I do have a platform. It is difficult to consider what consequences could come for what I say online. I try to be responsible, but mistakes are made, and that's eaten away at me. Making videos is actually only a small part of this job. There is a lot going on behind the scenes, and YouTube is pretty hands-off. I previously criticized how those creators interacted with their audience, but I didn't understand what it was like to get constant feedback, both positive and negative, from strangers at all hours. It's draining, and it is addictive. It's hard to stay away, because if you don't look, it's like thousands of people talking about you behind your back. I am now far more empathetic to those creators that I once criticized. That is not to say that I agree with their behavior. If I made the video again, I would absolutely still criticize them for all the reasons I did originally, but I would differ in tone. I critiqued those critiques in their own style. I argued that way because I felt they couldn't take what they were giving, and I wanted to give them a taste of their own medicine. That was petty. There is a pinned comment on that video which lists some amendments, but I wanted to take some time in this video to fully address what is my biggest regret, which is that instead of creating a healthier online discussion for video games, I just gave one side of the debate more ammunition. We shouldn't be censoring strong opinions to avoid offending people. This is the internet. Someone will be offended. You can't watch your words at all times to avoid stepping on toes because it's unavoidable. Negativity isn't bad. I've said this many times. It is necessary, but my criticisms got personal, and I often took snarky jabs at those critics rather than at their behavior. Although I've often attempted to dissuade people who agree with me from brigading the comment sections of the people I criticized, a lot of people have done so anyway and continue to this day. I accept responsibility for that. If you are one of those people, stop it. You're not helping. You're actually making things worse. The way we choose to talk to each other is directly tied to this pervasive doomerism. Public discourse is divisive because it isn't a discussion or even a debate. It is an apocalyptic war. The fanboys versus the grifters. Whoever wins, we lose, and video games die. This hostility stems from the power that consumers have today. The audience review is more trustworthy than the critics, and review bombing does have an impact. Sometimes it's immediate. Patches are swiftly implemented to address community concern. Players have agency over the games they play, and that has led to a feeling of entitlement. When a new game comes out, we have barely enough time to enjoy it before it's dissected and improvements are suggested for the next in the series. We're not considering games for what they are. We're considering what they could be. But there is a reason so few critics pivot into making great art. It is easier to criticize than create, and listening to what fans want isn't easy because fans want different things. There is a diversity of opinion which is not well represented because the debate is a false dichotomy. It's not even a question anymore of whether the game is good or bad. It's, is the game perfect or does it have flaws? That's not fair. All games can be better. We shouldn't expect perfection, and we certainly shouldn't demand it, because it escalates this doomerist thinking to absurdity. People herald the death of video games because a game they like is a 9 out of 10, and the people who disagree get disregarded for being drooling fanboys who can't fathom that their game isn't perfect. It's ridiculous. I've experienced both sides of this as a creator. People have called me a fanboy who can't accept that my perfect game is actually flawed. And I've also been called an insincere hate grifter that is complaining for views. These are the opposing sides of every argument in the discourse, and it is one that I myself have indulged. I accused several critics who were, by their own admission, leaning pretty heavily into negativity. But they were critics, or, if you'd like, game journalists. They are different to the average person in the comments section. We have gradually shifted from skepticism towards positive critic reviews to skepticism towards all positivity. But the person you're arguing with on Reddit isn't at risk of losing a sponsorship deal. There is no hidden agenda. They just disagree, which is fine. There are trolls, yes. There's also a worrying number of bots everywhere, which complicates this all further, but I think we can, in general, be a bit more charitable and refrain from immediately assuming an ulterior motive. The market is driven by the actions of the consumer. The consumer has power, undeniably, but it's not fair to blame the flaws of a game on one individual that bought it. It's not their fault, especially if you also bought it. You've contributed to that game's success in exactly the same way they have. It can be really difficult to see reason or logic in the opposing view. The algorithm pushes the most extreme views on either side of any debate. If we click on a video telling us that video games are dying, we'll soon see many more recommended to us. Suddenly, we're not faced with the opinions of an individual, it's a collective, and that forms a bubble. We never see the other side of the debate, except in the comment sections of videos which call them idiots. They are the crazed fanboys clicking on the video with the sole intent to spread hate. But think about the perspective from the angry commenter. The algorithm recommends videos you are likely to click on, not videos you are likely to enjoy. And if you're the kind of person, like me, that will click on things out of morbid curiosity, you may find yourself with a recommended page filled with videos that make you mad. You feel attacked, and so you feel an urge to defend yourself against all those lying grifters poisoning YouTube. It's easy to label people. In general, we aren't the best at articulating our feelings, so we latch onto phrases and idioms to argue. It's get good. It's also toxic positivity. We don't see those comments as individual expressions. We see them as war propaganda. Each "we're so back," another victory for the true gamers. Each "it's so over," another nail in the coffin for video games, and it's the slop-happy idiots holding the hammer. Neither is true. There is no war, and we are not soldiers. We are people who play video games. If you try to treat the other side with a little more respect, you might find, maybe, that they'll do the same for you. If they don't, then leave the conversation. No one is holding you hostage. If the argument is in bad faith, you don't need to tell them that. You can just stop arguing. If a thumbnail makes you angry, you don't have to tell the person who made it how you feel, because if you suspect they are rage baiting you and you comment on their video to tell them that, well, you've been baited. That's kind of on you, so stop. The world keeps turning if you just click away. You can be too optimistic. Although I've argued against specific examples, toxic positivity does exist in the games industry, as it does everywhere. I think it stems from how much we value certain games over others. This isn't just a problem with games, it's a problem with all media, because the two most important letters in the English language currently are IP. Innovation is less important than brand recognition. That's motivated by the consumer, not the corporation, and it hurts artists as well. Promising developers are scouted and have to put aside their original projects to work on iterative franchise installments. When they undersell, they're fired, wasting the better part of their careers on projects they had no passion for. IP can be anything, even gameplay mechanics. The Nemesis system from Shadow of War was patented by Warner Brothers and squandered. No one can legally make a game with that mechanic, and the patent doesn't expire until 2036. IP is the most valuable thing that a studio can own, and games are often made for the sole purpose of maintaining that copyright. We are slaves to the emotional connections we have to fictional worlds, and it's not as simple as being blinded by nostalgia. Games have more importance to us than the stories we remember from childhood, because games are more than stories. They can require thousands of hours of playtime to master. They can be sports. They are routines and rituals. They are social hubs. They are where you and your wife had your first date, or the last place you hung out with your closest friend who passed away. They can mean a lot. So when a new installment in a beloved series is disappointing, it can provoke really strong emotions and impact your general quality of life. But I don't think campaigning the studio for change is the solution. We need to be a little more realistic and understand that not everything can be a 10 out of 10 masterpiece. And if a game in a series is worse than a previous installment, it's not garbage. Even when it isn't your thing, it could be for someone else. Is it toxic positivity for people to disagree with your suggestions of change, or is it perhaps just as toxic to change a game they're perfectly happy with? Rather than argue about the direction a series needs to go in, I would recommend you look elsewhere for games that scratch that same itch, because nothing motivates AAA studios more than seeing their money go somewhere else. Focus less on what you've lost and try to pay attention to what you have. A lot of doomerism in Discourse comes from specific examples of games in a series or a genre that aren't as good as they once were. But that is then generalized to all games aren't as good as they used to be. It's all just slop. This is classic boomer mentality. It is old man yells at clouds energy. It's the same person saying all cinema is dead because Disney doesn't make good movies anymore until they do, and then it's we're so back until it's so over again. There are other movies, there are other games, tons of them. This is, to me, the most baffling sentiment of doomerism in video game culture. Not that the industry is in a slump, but that video games in general are all collectively getting worse. Last year was an amazing year for games. This year is already shaping up to be even better. I already have a number of fierce Game of the Year contenders, but I have much more on the backlog. And we're only halfway through the year. There's way more games ahead. Video games are a young art form. There's already been so much innovation in a really short period of time. We've only recently gotten to a point where it's accepted as a valid form of art. It boggles the mind to consider where we might go from here. It is genuinely exciting. There is an impatience to the discourse. The games we buy aren't as good as they could be. They need to be fixed or patched or improved in the sequel, or the industry dies and we all go back to kick the can, I guess. Obviously, sometimes they aren't fine. Sometimes they do suck, but not always. There are more games that suck nowadays, but that's only because there are more games, meaning there are more good games too. And as much as gaming corporations complain about rising production costs and a flailing economy, they're sitting pretty. So, no, I don't think video games are dying. I don't think Doom is coming. I think we actually have a lot to look forward to. This is fine. I've argued against Doomerism in this video, but don't treat all negativity as fatalism. I've tried to be pretty considerate of people who are worried about the state of the industry in this video. I'm not sure how well I succeeded, but if you're still around for the end of this video, do know that you are allowed to be worried and you're allowed to be negative. We can be civil about this, I hope. Probably not. If there's anything to be fatalistic about, it's the way we talk to each other on the internet, but it's worth a shot. Even if we are just planting trees whose shade we'll never know. The medium we love isn't dying, it's evolving. And maybe, if we can evolve how we talk about it too, we might find that the future of games is brighter than our doom-scrolling feeds would have us believe. So stop talking about the games you hate and go play something you love. Thank you so much to my lovely patrons. Thank you to IRANDMS, Bender, Wastoid, Blemkin, and a very special thank you to Lako and Choking on Razors. These videos take a long time to make. I wouldn't be able to invest the time and energy to make them without you. If you want to support the channel, Patreon is the best way to do it. I'll be posting an exclusive over the next little while where I'll play a demo for an upcoming game that I'm excited about. I'll also be doing a stream or two on Twitch soon, so give me a follow on there if you want to hang out live. The link is in the description. There's also a link to the Discord channel there if you want to keep up to date with everything I've got going on and hang out with the community. Tell me what games you're excited about in the comments. As I've discussed, comments are pretty important for creators. Comments make the algo send out the video to other people, and if enough people do that, I have a better chance of getting it seen. So if you have something to share about what I've said, or you want to roast me, go ahead. I'm rage baiting you, you big dumb dummy idiot, big shill fanboy grifter. Tell me you hate me. I've got bills to pay. I'm joking, of course. You're beautiful Gred heads. I hope you're doing okay wherever you are. Times are undeniably tough, but try not to dwell on worst case scenarios. Take care of yourselves, and please, please, have a great tomorrow.